And now on to a story that may have missed the mainstream news during the Superstorm coverage. We saw the East Coast essentially shut down in the wake of Hurricane Sandy this week. However, as many were ordered to shut down operations and remain indoors, especially those in the government, an unlikely group decided to go on with business as usual. The Supreme Court braved the elements this week, choosing to hear oral arguments on an array of issues. Everything from warrantless wiretapping to the use of drug dogs to search was on the table. So, should we be paying closer attention to the outcome of these cases? Well, to answer that, joining me now is the senior editor of Reason, Jacob Solom. Hey there, Jacob. First things first, give us a rundown of these notable cases that were up for debate in court this week.
Well, on Wednesday, the court heard two cases involving drug-sniffing dogs, which raised two questions. One is, how reliable does a dog have to be for his alert to justify a search? In that case, a vehicle search. And the other case had to do with a dog sniffing a home. Does that in itself constitute a search, the sort of thing you need a warrant for, or is that just an examination of odors in the air that does not require a warrant? And then the other case that was interesting from a civil liberties perspective has to do with the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which as of 2008 authorized warrantless surveillance of international communications involving people in the United States. And the question the Supreme Court is considering right now is not, is that constitutional? It's, can anybody sue over this yet? Does anyone have standing to challenge this law, or is it just the sort of thing we have to let go because nobody has the standing to sue?
And we also know that they are doing some type of legislation, some type of questioning about license plate scanners that police use to patrol. But on the surface of each one of these cases, they seem completely different. But they all kind of start to deal with the same thing, really, and that is American privacy. The justices didn't seem to be happy with the Obama administration's arguments in the case against FISA, for instance. So is there a possibility that the court will side with the ACLU for that?
Well, there seem to be at least three justices who are sympathetic to the arguments from the people challenging the law, including Anthony Kennedy, who's often a swing vote. So it's conceivable that they will say, yes, the people challenging the law, who are lawyers, human rights activists, who claim that they have they're worried about being monitored, that they have standing to sue, which means the case can proceed in the lower courts. It's conceivable they will say that. I hope so, because otherwise, this issue of the Fourth Amendment is never going to be resolved. Whether it's okay to have these warrantless, this warrantless monitoring, probably will never be resolved if they decide that these plaintiffs don't have standing. And the cases with the dogs, basically these drug-sniffing dogs have become a pretext that converts a policeman's hunch into probable cause for a search. In the case of a vehicle search, they can bring the dogs in under previous Supreme Court rulings for any kind of traffic stop. If the stop is justified, it's okay to bring the dogs in without any further evidence. And once the dog alerts, which means he does whatever the cop says he does when he thinks he smells drugs, the cop can search the car. Now, that alert may or may not be real. It could be completely fictitious. It could be a mistake on the cop's part. It could be that the dog is responding to the cop's accused, because the cop obviously is suspicious. That's why he wants to search the car. So the dog may sense that the cop wants him to alert, right? So basically, the dog becomes a license to search wherever the cop wants. Now, in the case of a house, which is even scarier, if they can bring dogs around everybody's homes, what that means is that a dog alert, even if it doesn't really indicate anything about what the dog smells, it can be enough to get a warrant to search somebody's home. And that to me is pretty scary.
I do want to break down these two cases just a little bit to explain to our audience a little bit about what's going on. So the first case was basically Florida versus Jardines, and what happened there was that a police officer and his dog was outside of a house, and the dog smelled drugs within the premises, and so they said that that was probable cause to go ahead and search it. Now, in the second case, what happened was that it's basically that the dog, they want to know, overall if dogs are certified to be able to make these cases. And what some people are arguing is that the dogs are more likely to respond to what their handlers' kind of emotions are than what their senses are telling them. Now, back in the day, in 1983, that kind of ruling that said that the dogs are allowed to go ahead and sniff in airports and sniff cars, for instance, says that, you know, dogs' smell senses are infallible, that we can trust them. But we also know that they're not infallible these times, and there are a lot of cases where they are calling up false positives. So the real problem here is questioning whether or not these dogs constitute a warrant or not. Am I right?
Yeah, well, yeah, more or less. I mean, the whole premise of the Supreme Court decision saying that a dog sniff is not a search, meaning police can do it at will, is that it will accurately detect, is there contraband here or not? That has turned out to be not the case. The dogs can have very high failure rates. There is research substantiating the point you made about the handlers' cues being picked up by the dog. They did a study where they had police handlers walk their dogs through various rooms where drugs supposedly were hidden. In fact, there were no drugs hidden, but the police were led to believe that at certain locations that were marked with pieces of paper, there were drugs. And the dogs were much more likely to falsely alert at those locations where the police thought there were drugs than at other locations, even locations that had Slim Jims hidden in them to sort of distract the dogs. So that's very powerful evidence that, in fact, that the police officer's expectations, either consciously or subconsciously, will influence how the dog behaves. And essentially, that means that the police and the dog between them, or the police get, the officer can get permission from the dog to search. And it can be wherever he wants, including a house, depending upon the outcome of the other case relating to whether you need a warrant to bring the dog around to somebody's doorstep.
And one of the other things that I do want to ask about, it kind of moves the conversation to, is this license plate scanners by police. Can you briefly explain what happened there, what developments came out of it, and why people are so upset in the first place?
Well, basically, this is, I mean, the police are collecting in an automated fashion information that they could do theoretically manually, right? They could just observe this. They could write down every license plate number that went by. So the theory here is that this is okay. You don't need a warrant of any kind because this is public information. It's publicly visible. But it starts to become something analogous to GPS tracking. There was a case involving GPS tracking before the Supreme Court in January where they said you need a warrant to attach a GPS tracker to somebody's car. Why? The guy's driving around in public, right? Anybody can observe that. Isn't that public information? What they said is no. Well, part of the court said no because it's a trespass. You have to trespass on somebody's car to attach it. But there also seems to be a majority for the position that the nature and volume of the information you collect, even if everywhere the guy goes is in public, you collect so much information by tracking him, say, over a month, everywhere he goes, that you know a great deal about him. The same thing goes for the kind of license plate tracking that can tell you about somebody's
Jacob,
travels.
we're going to have to end it there. I really appreciate your time. Obviously, there's a lot that's going on within the Supreme Court. Jacob Sullum, senior editor at Reason, thank you so much.
Thank you.